Just 1 week ago, the City of Detroit Lakes at the M-State campus hosted the second ever Aquatic Invasive Species Legislative Summit right here in Detroit Lakes. A dozen politicians, including senators and members of Minnesota's House of Representatives, were there in attendance, including most of those from right here in our area. And I was very pleased by kind of what came out of that AIS summit. Last year, during the first AIS, or Aquatic Invasive Species Summit, it was much more of an educational opportunity. There were a lot of people in the room, several hundred of them, that had a very good knowledge of what zebra mussels were and other potential aquatic invasive species, like spiny water flea and flowering rush and so forth. But it was really an educational opportunity for them to really learn and get up to speed on exactly what's going on. This year, during its Aquatic Invasive Species Summit, it was much more of, like the organizers hoped, a call to action. And it appears that the state legislators in attendance were listening, and we hope that they take some of those thoughts to heart as the legislative session begins this week. Amongst the bonding bill, Viking Stadium, and everything else, they do find time to deal with this. Aquatic invasive species has been a big issue here in northern Minnesota because we've been on the front lines and fighting it for the last 2 years. Ever since Pelican Lake was confirmed to have zebra mussels in it, we should have been in emergency mode. Frankly, only the last few months have I feel we've gone into emergency mode as a county government. About a year ago, we probably went in that mode as a city, and unfortunately it was 2 years ago, the only people in emergency mode were the private citizens of Becker County pushing these summits and pushing new legislation. But now we're moving in the right direction. In fact, I mentioned that bonding bill earlier. The governor has actually put money in his proposed bonding bill for aquatic invasive species. But you can't just throw money at it. There's going to have to be some legitimate issues that get discussed and looked through. The logistics of protecting the land of 10,000 lakes are daunting. A lot of people like a model that Colorado used, which is very restrictive and has a lot of checkpoints for boats to come in and out of the waters of Colorado. Problem is, the state of Colorado has about as many lakes as Becker County does. That's for the entire state. That's why the logistics are going to be extremely difficult. But there are a couple things that I think are really important that came out of that meeting. One, we had a consensus among the 12 legislators, including some of the most conservative politicians that were there, that the state of Minnesota needs to come up with more funding to help aquatic invasive species. As it stands today, less than 1% of the Department of Natural Resources' entire budget from the state of Minnesota goes to protect our lakes from aquatic invasive species. So what source of funding can we go to? Well, the DNR and the state has increased some of the funding, up to about $8 million. Still, that's only about that 1% of the $800+ million in the DNR's budget. So where would additional funds come from for both more research for possibly a biological entity and more checkpoints? State of Minnesota this summer will begin roadside checkpoints. Be prepared for that if you're visiting us from a neighboring state. The consensus was to get money from this, that constitutional amendment we passed back in 2008, the 3/8 of a cent sales tax. You know, that tax that brings in $400+ million a year into the state of Minnesota through a department to be used, especially in these Lessard funds and legacy funding. As it stands today, none of that money goes to aquatic invasive species. The wording of the constitutional amendment says protecting Minnesota waters. Politicians currently in St. Paul have interpreted protect to mean lakes that are not infested. We had a consensus among those 12 legislators that they would take the message to St. Paul that protect to them means protect from further spread of aquatic invasive species. In fact, 2 politicians, one being Dean Erdahl and even Gretchen Hoffman from Vergas, both said they would take that message to the House and Senate, that money needs to come from that Lessard Fund to help fight aquatic invasive species in Minnesota. Let's face it, financial times are tight. Almost a fourth of the legacy amendment money is unaccounted for anyway, at least to the public. We might as well see that go towards something that can be useful. I don't want to raise any more taxes to help fight aquatic invasive species, even though the city of Detroit Lakes has a 1% food and beverage tax, which a portion of that does go to help fight it. I think looking at these Lessard funds makes the absolute most sense and should have been done years ago. In fact, when this issue came up and was passed in 2008, some of that money should have gone to AIS protection and research right away, but it didn't. But it's not too late to right the wrong. I just hope it's not too late for lakes in northern Minnesota.